just as equally can walk in a circle. But the reality is we want to be able to walk in a direction. Now, if I was to use Christianese, which is just the internal language inside a church, is we'll hear terms like our Christian walk. Or others will go, well, Christian walk's not cool enough, so it's our Christian journey. And it's like, well, that's just as naff as walk, to be perfectly honest. But what is it that we're saying? What are we trying to say? Well, what we're referencing to is we understand that we walk out our relationship with God. And we use the term journey because we understand that there's a transformational process that happens in our lives, and that transformational process is just that. It's a process, it's not an event. It's not from one thing to the other. It's actually a process, and that process is walked out in our lives. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So therefore, having the right understanding of both things, and if we'll acknowledge that my revelation of church will determine for me what God can do in my life through the church. My revelation of Jesus will determine what God can do through me because of my revelation of Jesus and how it impacts me personally. You with me? Right? So let me just try and just what I mean by the walking out. So oversimplification to go real quick. So what we believe, what the Bible tells us, is that God creates humanity. Humanity rebels. Humanity ends up out of that rebellion, and we use the Bible word to explain what that rebellion looks like, is sin. In other words, that's this I don't need God to be at work in my life. Now, what happened there at the beginning is because of that event, what we end up with is what is known as, or we could see as, is this fractured image of what we are supposed to be as human beings. We were created in the image of God, is what the Bible says. In that image of God, we were created to be in relationship with that God. God's not distant. God wants to be up close, personal, and is relational. Right? So that image and that relationship was distorted and broken. So then we go through the annals of sort of, let's call it history, and we come up with where we find ourselves with Jesus. And the Bible tells us that what he did. So last week, it was Easter, so we're talking about his death and his death on the cross and his resurrection. We know that his death represents that all judgment of sin on humanity was passed upon Jesus. And that's what his death was about. We know that if we put our faith in Jesus, and not our faith in just, we know who he is, but our faith in the fact that who he was and the what he did, the consequence of the who he was and the what he did, the result of it is if we put our faith in that, the Bible tells us that we come into a place of what is called right relationship with God. That we don't have to fear his judgment because his judgment has been passed upon Jesus on our behalf. And in faith, we come into a right relationship with God. Not based on what we do, but based on what he did, we put our faith in that. Then the Bible shows us that what happens when we do that, what happens is, it says, and Paul talks about it, he says, this mystery somehow, and I use the term somehow because I can't explain it because I'm not God. Somehow, the Bible teaches that this God comes inside. And this coming inside begins this restoration process of what was once we were a fractured image of what it means to be created in the image of God. A fractured relationship has now been restored, and this God comes on the inside. And then, so there's all the verses that we know, and we can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and nothing's all of that sort of thing. But what it is God is now at work on the inside. Right? Now that God at work on the inside is there, and he begins a transformational process. Now our walk is, as we walk in relationship with him, as the impact of the relational dynamics of our lives, which is church, where we end up is we're walking it out more and more, We become more conscious of the God that is within us, which means we slowly, step by step, become more like Him. Because the more conscious we are of Him, the more we express the Him that is in us, and the Him that is in us begins to influence who we are. So if we understand that at this walk, right, so we've got these two revelations, who Jesus is, what His church is, helps us in this walk. Because this God that I'm talking about, the Bible shows us that here He is, He's selfless, He's completely selfless. Right? And this selfless God comes on the inside. So if you want to know what walking your Christianity out looks like, is you learn to become more and more less selfish and more selfless. You become more focused on the people around you and what's going on in their life and the benefit of them, rather than what's going on in your life and how they can benefit you. And as you walk it out, you become more and more like Him, with the ultimate goal. This transformational process takes place. The ultimate is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, it tells us, this is the good news, it tells us that on that, what we could term as the second coming of Jesus, on the twinkling of an eye, we are changed. We're transformed from the corruptible to the incorruptible. The old is gone and everything is completely brand new. In other words, we become just like Jesus. Now, just like Jesus meaning, He was fully man, in relationship with God in an unfractured condition. So that's what we become. You get what I'm trying to say? Right? And so now the important thing is in this process, without getting too sidetracked, is Jesus is, sometimes if we're not careful, we go, oh, Jesus is the benchmark. If we're not careful, we go, oh, Jesus is the new standard. So instead of going, oh, well, we had the 10 commands, and now we've got Jesus. Now I've got to be just like Jesus, just like Jesus, just like Jesus. Well, you're never going to be just like Jesus. Until one day when He says, the good news is in this transformation of the corruptible, gone, and we become the incorruptible, it says we get new bodies. I mean, the Bible's fantastic if you believe it. So what it really means is so Reno, you think you're so good because you're so tall and handsome. that I'm already putting my order in for what my new body looks like. I've got my order in. It's going to be somewhere between 6'1", 6'3". Whole lot of other characteristics that my new body's gonna have about it. See, the funny thing, I said that to someone one day. I said, I've already put my order in for my new body. And they thought I was serious, so anyway, but I said, what's it look like? He said, well, it's about 6'1", 6'3". And so this guy happens to be 6'3", and he says, oh, being tall is not all it's cracked up to be. And I went, oh, really? You don't hear tall jokes, do you? Tall, angry man sitting in the back of the boat yelling. So we don't hear that. And so I said to him, okay, give me one pitfall of being 6'3". Pregnant silence, right? Just this silence. Very too long, sort of like an overdue pregnancy. And he sort of goes, he's thinking, he says, well, when you have a shower, you have to duck to get under the nozzle. I'm thinking, and that's a disadvantage? So anyway, I don't know why I'm telling you that. But anyway, so this Jesus is actually what He is for us, is a picture of what a human being, because you've got to remember, Jesus is 100% God, 100% man, in perfect relationship. Jesus is a picture of what the unfractured image of a human being in relationship with God looks like. He is what we're headed towards. But when you talk about it, as Christians, we have a destiny. That's our destiny. That we come into, like He was, into a relationship with God where there's actually, yes, there is nothing that separates us, not just based on what He did for us, but actually all of the things that we struggle with, all the things we're trying to deal with, all of that, just like that. It's all new one day. It's all gone. Now, the challenge is, though, that's the ultimate. But in the meantime, there's this journey, or there's this walk, and I believe, having a good revelation of both of these revelations, of the revelation of Jesus, the revelation of the church, has huge impact on your life. So my question to you is what is your perspective of church? How do you see it? Is it just an institution? Is it an organisation? Is it a building? Is it just something that you go to get your jollies? Is it something that's there for you? It's there to serve you? It's there to do things for you? What is your perspective of it? Because if we understand, our perspective of things determines how we engage things. All right, so let me try and illustrate what I mean by that. So your perspective of a person will determine how you interact with that person. Now, what's interesting is that perspective doesn't have to be true, but it will cause you to behave as if it is true. So your perspective is as a reality. So it's the same way when it comes to how do you engage the church. Whatever your perspective of the church is, it will determine how you engage it. So the question that begs to be asked is do you have a good perspective of what church is? So where do we get our perspectives from? Because they're important too. We usually get our perspectives from the things that we've heard. We get our perspectives from the things that we're told. We get our perspectives based on the labels put on things, or the labels that we put on things. So very much comes down, even if you take the same illustration at a personal level. See, who you are as a person, your identity, what you base it on will determine how you live your life out. So sometimes we'll shape who I am as a person based on the things somebody said about us. Well, it'll be based on sometimes the things that we've heard said about us, and they shape our perceptions of who we are. They sometimes are based on the labels we put on ourselves. Here's a label that's been put on us by other people, and then sometimes we'll put a label on ourselves. None of them can be true, but because we haven't allowed these things to shape our perspective, it will determine how we actually interact with life, as in who the person I am is. Right? Do you get what I'm trying to say? So understanding or having the right perspective of church is really important. Now, as I said, is it just a building? Is it just a corporation? Is it just an institution? Is it an organisation? Or is it what one author that I was reading said, it's the ideal habitat for a Christian. The ideal habitat. Now, if it be the ideal habitat, that's why I'm talking about this right revelation. If it be the ideal habitat, my understanding of it, which determines how I interact it, will determine how my life is played out. Get what I'm trying to show you? So the church. So let's just, Matthew chapter 16, verse 15, is a conversation that takes place with a guy called Peter and Jesus. Sorry. I know, all it needs to do is go 6'1", doesn't it? It's perfect. It's got to be 6'1" and no gut. But anyway, where was I? Conversation between Peter and Jesus, right? Matthew chapter 16, verse 15. And so Jesus asked this guy Peter, he says to him, so Peter, who do people say that I am? So he gives them the answer. This is who people say you are. Then Jesus asks him another question and he says, but who do you say I am? Now, can I say that's probably the most important question you'll ever have to answer in your life. Now, you've got to remember, we're eternal beings. So I'm not just talking about until you're 65 and die type thing. I'm talking about the most important question that you'll ever have to be able to answer in life is who is Jesus? Right? So Peter gets asked this question, and then he gives his reply, and he comes back to Jesus and he says, well, you're the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. And then Jesus replies to him and said, well, blessed are you, Simon, because that's who he was then, which basically means you're pretty flimsy. You're like a reed. You're pushed from one thought to another thought, one belief to another thing. You don't really know who you are, and you don't really know what you believe. You just go with the wind. So now you are Peter, a rock. Meaning you know who you are. You're rock solid. You're not pushed to and fro. You're not easily pushed around. You're not easily manipulated with thought or any of those sorts of things. You're a rock. And he said, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Now what's important of that is that flesh and blood, meaning people, meaning you didn't work it out, God. Now so here's the first, this is, because remember what Jesus is bringing in, a whole new order for humanity, right? So what happens? God speaks to Peter at a relational level. Personal God. A relational God. God to one man, not God through a priest or anything like that, but God man. Alright? It's important. And so then Jesus says, and upon this rock, now the rock is not, your name is Peter, and Peter's the head of the church. The rock is, God speaks to people at a personal level. God relates to people at a personal level. There is a God-man relationship thing. He says, and upon this rock, I will build my church. And then he goes on, he says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Message Bible says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, and it's expansive with energy. It'll be expansive with energy. I thought, how the best way I could probably describe what I mean by expansive with, what it means by expansive with energy. If you think of it like this, if you were starting a business and you thought, what's it going to be like in 2,000 years' time? The Bible's a pretty good business startup. Not the Bible, but the church. Because 2,000 years ago, it all began with a small group of people. And now, after 2,000 years, with all sorts of drama, with all sorts of crazy things going on in the church, in the world that we live in, the most amazing things happened over the last 2,000 years. The church now is better than it was then. And the church is, you can find the church in any country, in any place, anywhere in the world. It's got more outlets than Starbucks, McDonald's, and all the other fast food chains all put together. It's not a bad business model. That's expansive. So when you look at the church and you look at it from that perspective, it's like, whoa. That doesn't matter. There is the good, the bad, and the ugly. But even with the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's pretty impressive. Do you get what I'm trying to say, right? And so he says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, the term church is important also. Because the church, that word means the gathering of the called out people. Now, firstly, the word gathering means, it's a gathering, people coming together. Right? So people come together in a building. People might come together and they're organized and all of those things. But that's what it is. It's a gathering of people. There's this interconnectedness of humanity and human beings. You see what I'm trying to write? And so the called out people, meaning those who are called out of darkness into light. Now, qualification, darkness. Darkness meaning people who don't have a revelation of Jesus. They don't have a revelation of Jesus that is translated into a personal relationship that has begun the process of transformation. That's what darkness is. Called into light, I have a revelation of Jesus. I've come into relationship with him, and the transformational process has begun. That's all it means. Right? So it's the gathering of these people. That's what the church is. So what I want to do is just have a look in the Bible and just read a few verses, and then pick up one observation and go from there. Is that all right? Right. So let's so Acts chapter 2 is where we're going to pick up. Acts chapter 2, verse 41. I want to just read through it It says, those who believed what Peter said were baptized and added to the church that day, about 3,000 in all. Verse 42 says, all the believers devoted themselves, which basically all it means is they gave themselves wholeheartedly to it. It wasn't half-hearted. You're never going to do anything in life if you do it with half measure. That's true for pretty much every aspect of your life. Whatever you do, give yourself to it 100%. And so here we've got, it says here that these people, this community of people, devoted themselves to it. And then it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship and sharing in meals, or the common meal, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. Verse 43 says, and a deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place. They shared everything they had, and they sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshipped together at the temple. Each day they met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Right? Now, observation that I want to just pull out and highlight. I'm going to read it through one more time. I want you to hear it, filter it through this. This was a very relational dynamic that is taking place here. This is very people and people. This is people hanging out with people doing things together. And now, as I read it, I want you to hear it through the eyes of a relational perspective. Right? Because remember, so the gathering is a relational thing. It's not pulling a whole lot of people together and just stand there like, who are you? It's like, no, it's not. The church is not the tube. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just bad culture to talk on the tube. We all know that. Right? So if you just filter it through the whole, the relational thing, as I said, it says, so all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship. And what is fellowship? Fellowship is people hanging together, but they're hanging together and they're serving one another, doing things for each other. They are concerned about the well-being of the other person. They do things according to their material ability or their time availability, do things to help people and to do things that are going to benefit people other than just themselves. That's what it means to be in fellowship, right? It says the sharing in meals, that's relational, including the Lord's Supper and the prayer. A deep sense of awe, just think of relationship, right? Come over them all, and all the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. All the believers, they met together in one place and they shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions. So we're not going to give an offering in a moment until you've got to give everything away, right? So it's not right? It says they worshipped together at the temple. And they met in homes for the Lord's Supper. They shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God, which means talking about the good things that God is doing in their lives, all right? And enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who have been saved. You notice it says to their fellowship, the relational dynamic. That's what God added to. He didn't add to the apostles' teaching. He didn't add to how many podcasts can I listen to in a week. I like Chris Mickelson when he gets on a band. He says, you can listen to as many podcasts as you like, but which one of them is going to visit you in hospital? Right, so there's this relational dynamic that takes place. Now, there's a term which says that sharing in meals, the common meal, which is a relational thing, right? Now, without getting too into it, I want to just introduce this thought for a moment, right? So if you just hold that thought where we're in Matthew chapter 9, and pick it up in verse 9, and it says this. It says Jesus was walking along and he saw a man named Matthew. Now this is Matthew talking about himself here, right? It says, saw Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple. Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. I think there might have been a bit else to go on, but anyway. And so then verse 10 he says, later Matthew invited Jesus. So get up, be my disciple. Then next thing that happens is Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests. Along with, so you got, Matthew says, okay, come on, Jesus and you Jesus people, come to my place. Right? But then he had his people with him. And as the other dinner guests along him, there was tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. I like the way only tax collectors got named, but anyway. Then verse 11 it says, but when the Pharisees saw this, who are the Pharisees? These are the people intent with making people live out religious law based on who can be included and who has to be excluded. All right? All of their rules were, if you do this, you're included. If you do that, you're not included. In fact, these are the rules to make sure that this group of people are excluded. That's what the Pharisees did. That's what they represented. And this is, so it says this, when they saw this, they asked his disciples, why does the teacher eat with such scum? I mean, listen, it's like pretty wild, isn't it? So if you were now to follow through the different Gospels, and you'll see that comes up a couple of times where Jesus is confronted by religion according to whom he was spending time with. And that type of language is used to describe religion's view of these people. Now, but if we understand this sort of, let's call it this relational dynamic that is happening here, and we understand how Jesus actually messed with the relational dynamic, because see, culturally, if we go back there, culturally for you to sit down and have the common meal, or to use the term break bread with people, so we're not talking about communion, we're just talking about we're eating together. Culturally, what you were saying is we're friends for life. This is friends for life. So Jesus was messing with religion here. In fact, not only was he perhaps just messing with religion, he was revealing there's a whole new social order that he's about to bring in. A social order that is not full of rules of inclusion and exclusion and all those sorts of things, but there's only one. I'm going to do something so that whosoever wills, everybody is included, and all they have to do is believe that I did something so that they could be included. And then as you go on, potentially this whole thought of this relational dynamic around having meals together would be a place where the grace of God was exhibited. Because in this relational dynamic, in this having meals together, there wasn't rules of inclusion and exclusion. There was just one thing that gathered everybody, and that is the person of Jesus Christ. And not just is it just that the grace of God is displayed in it, but the nature of God is also displayed in it. The selfless nature of God, where it's not about the relational dynamic is not about me. The relational dynamic is about others. That I'm not in a relationships for what I can get out of people. I'm in relationships for what I can bring to people. Whole different social order. Do you get what I'm saying? Right. So now culturally, if we get back to this what's taken place here. Now I'm using the term culturally. Now you've got to remember, we've got to be careful how we read this. All right? I've read that passage there from Acts, and it all depends how you view it. You can see that as that was the beginning, or that was the catalyst foundation of the church. That's all began through what happened here. This is the beginning. Or you can call it the early church, and people do call it the early church. And often when people call it the early church, they're using it in the context of that was then and it doesn't have to be now. So you hear people talk about it, and you say, oh, well, and theologians will say, well, hey, the gifts of the Spirit, things like healing, that was for the early church. Well, I've seen more people healed by God than I can count. Well, speaking in tongues, that was for the early church. Well, I speak in tongues, so that makes me part of the early church, which means I have to be nearly 2,000 years old. Admittedly, sometimes I feel that old, but that's what it's saying. You can't, and so if we're not careful, when we say that was the early church and view it like that, we can dismiss things. So we can look and say, well, that was the culture then, rather than this is the culture Jesus is wanting to bring out. This is what I believe, so because it's the early church, I can adjust this to line up with my thoughts. But if I see it as foundational and beginning, no, I'm going to line up my thoughts to line up with this. I've got a truth if it's the early church, and I'm going to adjust this to line up with my truth. Or I recognize that, hey, maybe this is way more foundational than I am, so I'm actually going to line up with I'm going to line my perception of truth up with this. So it all depends how we see it. So we can look at this and we can say, well, culturally that was back then, but it doesn't apply now. Or we could say, hey, maybe Jesus was introducing something that we need to question. Is this a part of the way we think, and this is a part of the way we do life? You get me? Right? Right. So then what they believed in the way they were is they believed that what they were a part of, meaning family, meaning community, that what they saw themselves as, I belong to it, and it belongs to me. That they're one of the same thing. I'm a part of a family, and the family is a part of me. I'm a part of a community. Community is part of me. Interesting, hey? That's certainly not how we see things today. It's not how it is. And I think it's a good reminder for us to recognise that, when we live in a city like London, there's people who have been raised here, but statistics tell us there's more people live in London that aren't from London than are from London. People move to a city like this, to a large urban environment, for a number of different reasons. Some people move here for opportunity. Some people move here to avoid social stigma in a smaller environment where they can come into a bigger environment and find a sense of anonymity and in that form community. That's why in big city there's all sorts of different communities of people, like-minded people forming community. People can move into a city like this because they're being transferred for work. And most of the times when people move into an environment like a big urban environment, they leave behind family. And church has great opportunity to actually become people's family in an environment where I had to leave family, but I could come into it. Now the challenge is culturally, back then, how I saw family, it was as much a part of me as I was a part of it. Community, it's as much as part of me as I am it. Now, so what do I mean by that? In other words, I belong to it, it belongs to me. Right? Now, let me just try and explain that to you, or I'll show you something. Once again, a bit of a contrast. Romans chapter 12. All right. Verse 3 to verse 5, I'm going to read from it. It says, because of the privilege and the authority God has given me, I give each of you a warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluations of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith that God has given us. Now, that's sort of a bit of a prelude to what I'm going to read out, but it's important, that bit, because, see, what does that mean? Basically what Paul is saying, hey, just have a humble perspective on life. He says, don't think yourself more highly than you ought, but according to the faith. Right? So that faith is we've put our faith in Jesus. Because I put my faith in Jesus and everything he's done and everything he represents and my revelation of him, the Bible tells me I have right relationship with God. Regardless of whether things are perfect or not in my walk out, according to what Jesus did, I have right relationship with God. And the only reason I have right relationship with God is because of what Jesus did, not because of the estimations of my own ability. In other words, how good am I? Right? And so in other words, it's a little bit like maybe putting this, don't be, what's to use the words he says, be honest in your evaluation of yourselves. Don't think you're better than you really are. So let's take your whatever top 10 that you think is perfect human behavior that's going to make God happy. Now, if you've got your top 10, now give yourself a score out of 10 where you end up on those top 10 things. Some of you, if you're not careful, are that self-righteous, you just gave yourself a 9.9 on all 10 things. Right? But the reality is, most of us would be lucky to get an 8 out of 10 on at least one of them. And probably in reality, we're closer to a 2 out of 10 as it outworks on a consistent basis longer than a week. If you got that, thank you. You get what I'm trying to say? So in other words, he's saying, don't evaluate yourself by your own sense of self-righteousness. Now, once that's important, you can put it in, it's because of what Jesus did, because immediately what that does affects the way I see other people. Affects the way I value them, affects how important I see them to be. It affects whether I pass judgment on them. It affects whether I forgive them. It affects whether I get jealous. It affects whether I get envy. It's people. It affects whether I get overly critical of people. It affects the way I interact with people if I've got the right perspective of myself. Yeah? All right, so then he goes on and he says, just as our bodies have many parts, each part has a special function. So he tells us, look at our bodies to understand how the body of Christ works. Body of Christ is an analogy for us to understand how the church works. Right? They're not two separate entities. It's think of body to understand church. Right? Then he goes and he says, I love this, and then he says, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body, and we all belong to each other. Now, freak me out. In this day and age, the thought that you belong to somebody? Oh, no way, I am my own man. I'm my own girl, whatever it might be. And no, nobody tells me what to do. Nobody tells me what to think. I am me. And that is sort of like, that's in our Western culture, that's our cultural norm. Do not tell me what to do. Do not tell me how to think. You don't own me. That just doesn't, the Bible goes, whoa. So the way we naturally think, if I hadn't have got to where I am now and said, here's the reality, you belong to me. According to modern Western culture, you should have started throwing things at me. Or you would have said, I don't belong to you. Get on your own bike and ride home. Because that's how we think, right? But back then, this is how they thought. I belong to the family I'm a part of as much as the family belongs to me. The community I'm a part of, I belong to it, and it belongs to me. There's this sense of a relational dynamic that wasn't afraid of its interpersonal connections. Flies in the face of modern, popular Western culture where individualism is so rampant that to think that you belong to something and something belongs to you is like freak you out stuff, yeah? All right, so let me just quickly go through just the thought of individualism. Because if I said, rampant individualism, I don't know where your mind goes. Probably the best way to go is go the true definition of it. Because often we hear words that are used and don't actually understand where they come from. So the term individualism is not just a term, it's actually, from my understanding, is a social theory. And it's a social theory that became prevalent in, let's call it England, because that's where we live, when the breakdown finally happened, when we had the sort of the lords and serfs, and we had the highborns and the plebs, where we had one group of people who saw themselves as born and entitled, and everybody else was born and unentitled. That the individual rights of the serfs and the plebs didn't exist. And when the social theory started to develop of individualism, that's where individual rights come to the forefront. And that's where we end up in the world in which we live in today, in Western culture, where the whole concept of human rights, and each one of us is equal, and each one of us does have our own rights, and there is nobody better than anybody else. There is nobody born higher than anybody else. There is no race that's more superior than any other race. We are all equal. That's where it all comes from. But like everything, you have this pendulum swing, where it just, if we're not careful, it keeps swinging. And we just keep going and we keep going, and it begins to completely influence everything about the way we think. Right? So if you just take that thought and listen to what I read out here, right? So this is talking about individualism. Individuals promote the exercise of one's goals or desires, and so value independence and self-reliance while opposing external influence on one's own interests by society or institutions. Individualism makes the individual the focus rather than the common collective interests. The individual does not buy into any philosophy that requires sacrifice of self-interest of the individual for any social cause. So the way we think when it comes to my personal world, and it's me, at best it's you and me, babe, versus the world. Usually it's I versus the world and everybody else. We live in a time where it's just so much about me and what I'm doing and what I'm getting, where I'm going. And if we're not careful, it doesn't really matter at the expense of who. That flies in the face of this relational dynamic that Jesus brought in. Can you see what I'm trying to say? Right? So here's the challenge. I'm saying all of this just to really put a challenge out to our church. Is can we exhibit this type of relational dynamic that seems to be here set in precedent in the Bible, right? So think of it from this perspective. So we enter into a relationship with a selfless God. How do we know he's selfless? Because the Bible tells us that God is love. Now that word love does not mean God is affectionately wants to hug and kiss you. Right? It's agape love, which basically means there is a selfless delight in others. In other words, there's a selflessness towards other. That God is selfless. There's nothing selfish in him, right? So we come into a relationship with a selfless God. If you want to look at what this love looks like, if you look at in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it sort of lists off, this is what this love looks like. All of this selfless love is not emotional. It's principle-based. But this selfless principle-based love actually evokes emotion, prompts emotion, right? And so here we have is this God. Now, so we come into relationship with this selfless God. And what did I say right at the beginning? He comes in, hey. So what comes in? A selfless God. And so as he begins to transform us, what does the transformation look like? Less selfish, more selfless. And more, the more he works into our lives, the more we express a selfless approach to the people around us, the more Christ-like we become. That's what Christ-likeness looks like. I want to be like Jesus. Well, start being selfless. The interesting thing is it's sacrificial though. Sacrificial meaning I actually, to engage myself in the lives of other people is is a sacrifice. Today's society, if we're not careful, most relationships that we engage in or we're taught to engage in are relationships of networking. In other words, if I can network you, get to know you, I might need you later, get to advance myself. We get into relationships with people so that you can, for my own self-gratification. We get into relationships with people not for mutual benefit, but for my benefit. How is this going to help me, the individual, get to where I want to go? Because where I want to go is the most important thing in life. That's not selfless living. And so much of the standard, if we're not careful and we just buy into, is completely opposite to what the Bible shows us. Now, the challenge I want to put out to us as a church is, can we create an environment where actually we have this sense of coming together? That's where this selfless behavior is actually a reality, where the nature of God is revealed. That's why often